Paul, you are muted. Sorry.
There. Good afternoon. My name is Paul Sanderson. I'm the legal coordinator for the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and I will moderate this virtual meeting that has been called in order to receive advanced public comment on the subject matter of proposed rulemaking. This meeting is being conducted jointly by the Department of Environmental Services and the Fish and Game Department, and I'd certainly like to thank DES for hosting the technology today. The DES is considering proposing the adoption of rules that will amend the ENVWT 1500 chapter in the Alteration of Terrain program. The Fish and Game Department is proposing to adopt new rules in Chapter FIS 1000 relative to the conservation of threatened and endangered species. This meeting is being recorded, and because it is a public meeting, I'll read the COVID notice text. On behalf of the Fish and Game Department and the Department of Environmental Services, and due to the state of emergency declared by the Governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with Governor's Emergency Order Number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04, as extended pursuant to Executive Order 2020-25, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there's no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the Governor's emergency order. However, in accordance with the emergency order, I'm confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone, with additional possibilities to submit comments via email to the Department of Environmental Services at pamela.g.monroe@des.nh.gov and or to the Fish and Game Department at comments@wildlife.nh.gov. We're utilizing WebEx as the software for this electronic meeting. Certain staff of the Fish and Game Department and the Department of Environmental Services have the ability to communicate contemporaneously during this meeting through the platform, and the public has access to contemporaneously listen and submit comments as indicated above. We gave notice to the public of the necessary information for accessing the meeting telephonically. Instructions have also been provided on the Fish and Game website and the DES website, and by notice published in the New Hampshire Rulemaking Register. If anyone has a problem with access to this meeting, please email Thomas Taggart at the address that is showing on your screen, thomas.taggart@des.nh.gov, or by calling him at 603-271-8156. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. At this time, I'd like to introduce Thomas Taggart of DES, who will explain for us how the WebEx platform works during the meeting today.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks everyone for your patience as we step through some logistical slides. First off, as Paul said, if you run into any technical difficulties, here's my email, thomas.taggart@des.nh.gov, and my phone number, 603-271-8156. Now, there are several ways to handle the audio in WebEx. If you need to switch your audio, at the bottom of your screen, you should see a small circle with 3 dots, an ellipsis, and if you click that, you'll get a pop-up. That's what I'm showing here with these arrows. You click at first it'd be a horizontal set of 3 dots. Click that, it turns vertical, and you get a pop-up, which with the switch audio option. If you choose that, you'll be presented with different audio connections. If you're connected to the computer already, as I am, it'll tell you, but you should be given an option for WebEx to call you if you want to connect through your phone for better sound quality, or you can call in yourself. You can click view and see the different numbers. So once again, at the top, you'll see a computer audio option. Then you'll see the option for WebEx to call you directly, and you can put in your phone number, or you can call in yourself. If you call in yourself, the number is 415-655-001, and the access or event code is 157-921-2028. If you do call in separately, from the computer audio, please turn off your computer audio so that we're not getting a horrible echo when it's your turn to comment or if you choose to comment. Now, for this webinar, to identify people who want to submit a comment to the record, we're asking that they raise their hands. So the way you raise your hand if you are calling in just by phone is you would hit *3 at the appropriate time. The appropriate time will be mentioned by Paul, the presiding officer. If you're in the webinar, if you successfully joined through the interface, you're going to want to look for a participants bubble in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx interface. Clicking on that will cause a side panel or pop-up to appear, in which case you'll see yourself listed as an attendee. So after you find and click that participants panel button, you should see the panel pop open with your name in there. And then you'll be given the option in the bottom right-hand corner of that panel with this little hand symbol, almost looks like a little bit of a fire sketch or something like that. If you click that, you'll successfully raise your hand. So clicking that button in the bottom right-hand corner of the participants panel will make a raised hand appear next to your name, and that's how we'll identify that you want to submit a comment at the appropriate time. So quickly, just to review, we've turned off chat. We will be chatting anything important to you, but you cannot chat directly with us. Please raise your hand if you want to submit a comment, or shoot me an email or call me if you run into technical difficulties. At the appropriate time, the presiding officer will ask those who wish to comment to raise their hand. We will call upon each attendee who raises their hand. I will identify them by name or phone number if they call in only, and I will unmute them. At that point, when you're unmuted, please introduce yourself and state who you represent, and then you will have 5 minutes to give your comment. Please make a point to unraise your hand when you're done. And then if you want to submit an additional comment later, you could raise your hand again if there's time for that. So a quick review, you're looking for that participants panel button to trigger the pop-up, and looking for that raised hand symbol if you're in the WebEx interface. If you're just on the phone, you can hit *3, and that will cause your hand to raise and lower. And there's my information one final time. 603-271-8156, thomas.taggart@des.nh.gov, and the hearing is being recorded. At this point, I'm going to turn back over to the panelists.
Thank you, Tom. This is Paul Sanderson again. And at this point, I'd like to introduce Ridge Mock of the New Hampshire DES, who's going to make an introductory remark regarding the DES proposal.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with a brief summary of recent activities pertaining to the draft rules presented today. The AoT rules relative to the consideration of impacts to threatened and endangered species have undergone several changes in the past 18 months. First, on December 20th, 2019, in response to a Supreme Court ruling, DES amended ENVWQ 1503-19H via emergency rule to require a project to be designed in a manner that would not jeopardize the continued existence of threatened and endangered species. This is consistent with RSA 212A9-3. Then on June 2nd, 2020, DES adopted a revised version of ENVWQ 1503.19H to replace the expiring emergency rule. The standard of not jeopardize the continued existence of threatened and endangered species was retained. The new rule also added a requirement of a study by a wildlife biologist. Following the adoption of ENVWQ 1503-19H on June 2nd, 2020, it was recognized that the adopted rule would need further development and clarification. To that end, the DES hosted 2 public input sessions in the fall of 2020 and has been actively engaged with New Hampshire Fish and Game personnel in evaluating the current process and identifying potential improvements to the rule and the process. The draft proposed rules presented today provide additional clarification to the process for both agencies and address the dual goals of protecting threatened and endangered species and having a clear, consistent, and efficient process for the regulated community. We appreciate your attendance today and welcome your comments. Thanks very much. And I'll turn it back to Paul.
Thank you, Ridge. And at this point, I would like to introduce Mike Marchand of the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department non-game program for his introductory remarks regarding the rules as proposed by Fish and Game.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Mike Marchand. I am the supervisor of the non-game and endangered wildlife program. And it is the non-game program which has the responsibility of reviewing potential impacts to threatened and endangered species associated with proposed activities. I just want to thank you for taking the time today to providing comments on these important issues. I'll provide a brief overview of what the rules include. So on the fish and game side, the draft rules being discussed today are intended to increase the transparency of the fish and game review process in general, while also recognizing that each project is unique. The first section of the draft rules include definitions of terminology used in the review process for threatened and endangered wildlife. These definitions may be familiar to many of you involved in permitting, as the draft fish and game definitions were largely based on existing long-established definitions used in the Federal Endangered Species Act. The second section of the new draft fish and game rules lay out the process for interaction, what we're calling consultation, between fish and game reviewers and applicants, if required by a state agency as part of a request for issuance of a permit, approval, or other authorization from that state agency. We specify the information needed for Fish and Game to initiate a review, other additional information that may be requested from applicants during the review process, and the department's review response, including any recommended conservation measures. We appreciate your interest in this important issue and look forward to any comments you have. So thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion. Back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Mike. I just have a couple of quick points here relative to the comments that we're going to receive from you today. The procedure that we're conducting today is somewhat unusual, but it is one that is allowed by the Administrative Procedures Act. Neither department has commenced formal rulemaking on these particular proposals, but we're seeking comment on the approach that we're offering in order to improve an existing business process. While each department has its own statutory requirements and its own responsibilities in the process, the two departments must work together in order to complete the required tasks. As you comment today, please, as Tom has indicated to you previously, unless you're speaking, please mute yourself to keep the sound quality high for everyone. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes, and we will stop you after that time. But if there is time at the end for you to have an opportunity to speak again, you can raise your hand again. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand as Tom explained, and we'll recognize you one by one for your comments. Please know that this is a public comment hearing, so we're not in the process here of taking questions for individual staff or trying to answer questions. Instead, we're listening to what you have to say to us. So therefore, please speak to the issues that you identify without referencing any particular individuals. If you are speaking for a group, it would be helpful if you could let us know that, as well as the number of persons that you are representing. There's no need to repeat comments that have already been made. They're in the record of the hearing, but you certainly may indicate if you would agree or disagree with comments previously made. We're not going to recognize anyone to speak a second time until everyone who wishes to speak has had an opportunity to speak once. I would also note here, please, as you're making your comments, be as specific as you possibly can. Note also, this is not the only way for you to make comments to us. Written comments are not only allowed, but encouraged. Both departments at these particular addresses, as you see on your screen, to DES and also to Fish and Game. Please know that the departments are going to be sharing all of the comments that each department receives. So if you make a comment to either one, the other department is going to see it. But in making your comments, if you can specifically identify the sections that you're speaking of, it will be helpful to us to understand the points that you're trying to make. So with all of these items in mind, it's now time for us to start our comment period. And so anyone wishing to make a comment, please raise your hand, and then we'll identify you and allow you to speak one by one, as Tom has explained.
And please don't be afraid to give me a phone call if you're having trouble. Once again, that was 603-271-8156. Paul, I'm seeing some hands being raised here, so if you're ready, going to identify and unmute the first person.
That's fine. And I believe that first person, at least on my list, would be Suzanne Fournier.
That's correct. So Suzanne, you are unmuted now.
Hello, good afternoon. Is
Hello.
the hearing okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Suzanne. Thank you.
Very good. Good afternoon. Yeah, my first question is, why are in the participants list, why do the attendees not able to see each other's names? Why are they hidden? They're hidden on my computer. I only see my name as an attendee, so is there a reason why other attendees' names are not showing up? It would be helpful.
That was actually a setting that I set, Suzanne. Sorry about that, Paul.
It was also
want-
true the last time.
If that's a setting that you can change easily, Tom, then I see no reason not to do so.
Okay.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you. And I'll reserve my comments for later in the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
So at this point, we will have you please put your hand down and we will recognize the next person, who, Tom, on my list is Chris Norwood.
Correct. Chris Norwood, I'm unmuting you now. Hello.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
And I guess I should say good afternoon. Sorry, it's a COVID day. We never know how long they feel. So my name is Chris Norwood, and I am the president of NAI Norwood Group, a commercial real estate brokerage firm. But I'm speaking today on behalf of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors and the 7,000 or so members in our state. I testified in front of the Senate on Senator Bradley's bill, specifically around this issue. And I am not the person to talk about the technicalities of either the Supreme Court case or the following rule changes. What I am asking for, or just wanted to make commentary to, is to what the host had brought up, the clear, consistent regulatory process. And since the Supreme Court case, specifically regarding the alteration of terrains permits, there has been a backlog for business owners, developers, housing subdivisions, in anything that would otherwise require the AoT permit. And I'm really welcoming the professionals in the room, the virtual room today, to speak to the details of it. But we are supportive, as the Realtor organization, we are supportive of anything that can help the situation that we're presently facing, which is the process which used to be consistent and predictable in, an 8 to 10 week AoT process, which is now has a timeline that's just unknown. And so whether that is some clarification of rules that allows for a streamlining, whether that's additional resources that are needed to review the applications, these are all things that we would consider important for the health of the real estate industry and also those who use the real estate, whether it's homeowners and or business owners. So I understand there's probably not any Q&A, but I certainly would welcome if you have any questions for me, and appreciate you allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Norwood. And if that concludes your comments, we will lower your hand. And the next person that I have on the list to speak is Helen Tam Simmons. I'd also like to note that Tom Taggart has advised me that apparently he can't change the setting with regard to showing who the attendees are, but certainly at the conclusion of this, we, on some of our public comment materials, can provide a list of attendees. So, Tom, I would have you recognize Helen Tam Simmons.
Helen, you are unmuted.
Hi, my name is Helen Tam Simmons. I'm from Stoddard, New Hampshire. You can all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I also serve on my town's conservation commission. And I think looking at your proposal, there is no doubt that this new proposal is watering down the protection of the endangered and threatened species in New Hampshire. And, specifically, basically all the changes are watering down, and I don't think that is good, definitely not good. For instance, you have reverted back to relying on what your departments call unreliable the data check. Okay, that is essentially leaving yourself blind. If the data is not good, why rely on that? And also, you basically strike out that the whole paragraph essentially is essential for protecting the species. And I want to speak a little bit based on my own experience. I live in Stoddard and I live on the lake here behind me. And I initially lived in Amherst, and throughout the almost 16 years I lived in Stoddard here, I have seen the environment around here degraded tremendously. For instance, the lake behind me has seen toxic cyanobacteria year after year. Okay, and also look at all these trees around me. I have spent hundreds and thousands of dollars, and my neighbors cutting some of the dead tree down. And why am I saying this? What I'm saying is that your department, both of your departments, you may think that, okay, we're gonna save the business some money, save the New Hampshire's, less regulation, but you don't realize that you are, through your endangering the environment, you're actually putting a lot of cost on us homeowners. Okay, and all of these are interrelated, of course. All of you biologists and scientists who have looked into the data, you know that the environment is integral, is relying on basically the very much the wild animals, the wildlife, for it to thrive. Especially based on the last few decades, we have an understanding that especially the more of the apex predators, when we protect them, we essentially protect the environment itself. And the endangered species and threatened species, it's not only the few endangered species and threatened species that we're protecting. There is a lot of data showing basically every single species that are protected. There are countless, there are hundreds of other species that are being protected. Okay, so the way that you're doing it right now is really endangering the ecosystem of New Hampshire and putting a lot of cost onto the New Hampshire homeowners. Okay, the lake behind me, my house here is going to decrease by 25% in value if the cyanobacteria continue to thrive year after year. And think about the tax revenue increase for the entire town. Most of the revenue here comes from tourism, comes from people's lake houses and so forth. All my neighbors spend hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars cutting down dead trees. And I have seen myself, I hike here regularly, hike and track animals here all the time. And I myself can attest to especially the fur berry animals, the population has been dwindling. And so we know all these are interrelated. And so you really cannot, we are under a lot of threat right now, climate change and lots of other issues. But if we continue to degrade the environment, and this endangered and threatened species protection is vital to protecting our environment and to reduce the tremendous cost that we are facing, that all the homeowners in New Hampshire are facing. So let's not, I'm also addressing other people who are on the panel and the attendees, for instance, the realtors group as well. I'm thinking about buying another property here, but I would really frown at anybody who would degrade the environment is because I know that you are putting a lot of cost onto my future ownership of the property. And being in New Hampshire is essentially being in United States. So I hope you all would look into it. You know what you're doing. Okay, you know this is not good for us, not good for the ecosystem. You may try to look at it, downplay it, and so forth, but we know if we really look into it, the data is very clear. We need to protect the animals, the plants and species, and not which are essential to the health of the ecosystem. So I urge you to just scrap this whole thing. This proposed rule is no good. And I appreciate my opportunity to speak. I would yield. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tam Simmons. If that concludes your remark, then we'll lower your hand. And I believe the next person in line to speak is Gary Abbott. And so, Tom, if you would recognize him, please.
Gary, you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Paul. I know on my computer, some of the speakers have been cutting in and out, and so if I do, please let me know. I want to first thank both Department of Fish and Game and DES for continuing to work on these rules, because I know I represent the construction industry and contractors and permittees who go through the process. And it has been a difficult process over the last year, and I know it's been a difficult process on the fish and game side. I'm going to take my 5 minutes to kind of go through some recommendations in the rules that you have presented specifically, and I'm also going to submit this in writing. But I'll start with fish and game rules. We looked at, let me tell you our process. We did have a environment committee meeting to review the rules that helped me with the recommendations that I'm about to present. Under the Fish and Game 1002.01, we look strongly at the words that could be vague or misinterpreted. We definitely look at indirectly or in the vicinity. What that means for me and what that means for somebody else sometimes can be confusing. We do think we have come up with a recommendation that is both more scientific and more particular to the endangered species. We recommend that crossing out the word indirectly in that 1002.01 and use the Fish and Game's definition of 1002.06 or the habitat area determined to be critical. That way, for those habitat that are off-site of a project could be considered, but the department would only look at habitat area for that area. And that would get us away from putting a measurement as to how far indirectly meant. And it would be based on a species that is hit as critical or endangered. On rule number 1003.03, the within an action area. Now this is a little bit different. We couldn't use the habitat area determined to be critical because it talks about targeted surveys. And the applicant may not have access to private property off-site. So we recommend striking out the word action and put area of the proposed project because it may be impossible to do targeted surveys a distance away from or on somebody else's property. We just think it might not be accessible to do the scope of the survey. And we also in that paragraph would like some clarity on how an individual would demonstrate specialized experience. It really is not defined how you would determine what specialized experience would be. And then under Fish and Game Rules 1003.05, Department Consultation Response, under C, we would like it some additional language, and we think this would be in place for, which would include any options available to the applicant regarding the utilization of the New Hampshire Fish and Game's Threatened and Endangered Species Compensation Mitigation Fund. We think that's a perfect opportunity once the department's determined, made a determination about that, and if there are any options available under the mitigation fund at the department. Now, I recognize some of these things that we're going to recommend through here is somewhat based on the current legislation going through the legislature, Senate Bill 129. We made these recommendations based on that going through. And I think we're looking for more from an applicant's position as to, we appreciate the 30-day response that's in these rules, but we're questioning what happens when more information is requested and what happens to the applicant, because there are no timeframes or responses. There's nothing outlined in the rules. So we also noticed in Senate Bill 129, there was going to be a definition of appreciably jeopardize the continued existence. Don't really see anything in here that gives us any guidance on what the jeopardized definition would be. Now I'll go to the DES regulations, and we use some of the benefit of what Fish and Game had done on their definitions. We thought the same should be done under 1503.08. Where it says in the vicinity. We think it should be in the habitat to be determined critical. We think, again, that really justifies based on the type of species that is being reviewed. Under 1503.19, the to prevent jeopardy in H, we feel that should be striked out. We think it should reference the RSA 212A9 Roman 3 regarding the continued existence, because that is really where the statute sets that jeopardy definition. So we think from a DES standpoint, they should be referring to the Fish and Game statute. Under 1503.33, again, under A, we make the same change where the words are in the vicinity. Again, we go to the habitat to be determined critical. And we put in the statute again, after consultation with the New Hampshire Fish and Game, instead of to prevent jeopardy, we use the same thing referencing the RSA. We think that's more in line with having both the Fish and Game and DES work together. We recommend under 1503.33, section B be removed from the DES. We believe that is covered under the Fish and Game rules, section 1003.04. There already is a procedure under Fish and Game for notification, and we believe that if DES finds something, it should be reported to Fish and Game, as Fish and Game has the responsibility. So those are our technical of the rules, but we think we have not gone far enough to explain what happens from an applicant as they go through this process, because the process still doesn't, for us, give us any handle at how long a project or a proposal would take going through the Fish and Game process. And so we appreciate the 30-day review, but we also have a lot of questions, or we as an association have a lot of questions regarding what happens after the 30 days and the procedures that probably should be put in some format under rules. Again, I don't want to miss anything here, in the sense that we really appreciate what Fish and Game has done, making this step in trying to address both the rulemaking and DES in trying to fix this so it's a workable solution, both to protect the environment as well as for applicants that go through the process. And again, thank you very much for listening to my comments.
Thank you, Gary, for your comments. At this point, we will lower your hand. And Tom, the next person on my list to speak is Craig Schultz.
Craig, you are unmuted.
All right, thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay? Terrific, thank you. I had sent in some information in writing. I thought that if it was all right with everybody, I'll just quickly read sort of the highlights of that to keep my comments as succinct as possible, and then go from there when I finish. Again, my name is Craig Schultz, and I work for American Excelsior Company. American Excelsior is a manufacturer of erosion and sediment control products. We've been in business for over 130 years and introduced and actually the first rolled erosion control products in the 1960s. We provide a wide range of products, including rolled erosion products, hydraulically applied erosion control products, sediment retention fiber rolls, straw wattles, those sorts of things. My comments today are based on our field experience over many years, and we also run what we believe is the largest privately owned large-scale testing facility of its type in North America, in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. So we are very active, and these comments come from those years of experience. Specifically, I want to talk about, I believe I'm referencing it correctly, WQ 1506.15, the manufacture of erosion and sediment control products. Our concern with that, as it's stated, is it talks to how they shall not contain welded plastic or monofilament, non-monofilament polypropylene netting or mesh. So my statement is this: manufacturers, not only us, all manufacturers, offer temporary rolled erosion control products and so forth that meet these rules. They can supply, in that example, netless blankets or blankets that are netted with jute products for these temporary solutions. However, it's important to note that when it comes to the use of turf reinforcement mats, often referred to as TRMs, it's not possible to meet the requirements of this new rule that's proposed. And we just want to make sure they are considered separate products. TRMs are products that are designed to reinforce vegetation and reduce erosion on projects where the vegetation alone could not withstand the expectant forces. Those forces are commonly seen on steeper slope designs and in channels where vegetation alone cannot withstand the erosive forces. Often that's referred to as shear stress in many examples. When installed properly, TRMs should be covered with soil and or vegetation once established, so they're not exposed to the surface like the temporary products are. It's common for TRMs to be used instead of items like riprap or other hard armor in appropriate applications because vegetated channels have cooler discharge because of the water passing over something like hot riprap or stone or concrete. Vegetated channels are safer than hard, potentially sharp riprap and other hard armor. TRMs have a lower installed cost. They allow easier site access. They are less destructive in their installation process. They increase stormwater filtration and stormwater infiltration. They allow for mowing and work around the site if desired. And the TRMs allow the site to return to natural conditions without introducing imported rock. They have a lower carbon footprint due to less trucking and heavy equipment. As I stated earlier, TRMs should be considered a different product category that is not included in the new rule mentioned before. For reference, this has been proven to work very well in the latest Minnesota DOT specifications that remove plastic netting from temporary rolled erosion control products, but they continue to allow plastic netting components on TRMs. Thank you for that. I would like to add a couple more things, and there's a large amount of data that I sent in my public comment, and I just want to touch base on some things that we would like you to consider moving forward. And I know it's not part of the change rule today, but I do want to at least mention a few things that we come across in these sorts of changes. We want you to be sure to understand that when hydraulic products like hydromulch, hydroseeding mulch, BFM, FGMs, we think it's important that you make sure that those products do not contain plastic fibers. Some upper end products do include those now. Ensure that the chemicals that they're using for binding and so forth are tested and proven to be safe for humans and the environment. And that some of the chemicals you might be concerned are the binders, tackifiers, and specifically the biggest one we find recently that actually was removed from Minnesota was toxic malachite green. Malachite green is the color that's often used. So we think that there's a lot of things to consider. I know my time's coming to an end. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today and look forward to being of assistance in any way we can. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. And so, Tom, we still have hands raised for Gary Abbott and Mr. Schultz, who just finished speaking. So if we can lower their hands, and then next recognize Kevin Nyhan for his comments.
Kevin, you are
Good
unmuted.
afternoon. Oh, excellent. Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you for the record. My name is Kevin Nyan, and I represent the Department of Transportation, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on the rules today. The first point, I guess, that I would like to make is that talk about the DOT's mission, which in part largely is to develop and maintain a safe and efficient transportation network. And what I want to focus on today is this idea about the maintenance piece and the fact that the roads that we're maintaining were built and authorized by people in governing bodies that preceded us, often by decades. I also ask that because of that, our roads are where they are by and large if we're not building new roads, and that I feel that there should be some room in the rules that acknowledges that maintaining what we have is very different than building new roads. And so for that, I'm just grab my notes here. And so I guess first on the FIS side, I would ask for your consideration of an inclusion of an FIS 1003.02C or someplace else in the rules that it makes sense, which would acknowledge that fact, saying maintenance and repair of state roadways, which is funded or approved by the Department of Transportation, shall be exempt from the requirements to undertake any assessment of habitat features required under the chapter, provided that such roadways are not expanded outside of the existing right-of-way or associated easements. I think it's fair to say that because the roads are where they are, that maintaining them where they are would happen irrespective of the vegetation that's there. And I would point out that this is very much in line with exemption that exists in the shoreland statute, and for reference, that's RSA 483-B:5-b Roman 7. And I guess that's my first point. The second, the rules feel, and I'll speak now specifically to the alteration of terrain rules. Second. Feels that there's no room for negotiation with Fish and Game or for coming to a a mutual agreement among recommendations. So specifically, ENV WQ 1503.19H says that for any project that requires consultation with Fish and Game, that the project incorporates all conservation measures recommended by Fish and Game. So I think that there are times when a recommended conservation measure may not be practicable and that there may be other opportunities. And I guess I'd like the rules to reflect that especially, well, for us, we've enjoyed a really great working relationship with both agencies, but that's often a consultative process where there's some back and forth. One other thing I guess I would ask as you respond to the comments is to consider the part of RSA 212A, which says the provisions of 212A or any rule promulgated under the chapter shall not be applicable to a state department or agency when that state department or agency in the process of undertaking an action is required by federal law or regulation to address the environmental impact on wildlife or wildlife habitat of that action. So I guess I still wonder, how these rules fit into that larger context. So having that would be appreciated. There is also a provision of the alteration of terrain rules that allows state agencies to enter into memoranda of agreement with DES because there are equivalent processes in that agency such that the agency is not required to obtain a permit from DES, so it's specific to alteration of terrain. I'm wondering if you could consider, I don't have any suggestions off the top of my head right now to how that could work, but how would working under an equivalency determination incorporate these new rules? And then lastly, I would like to say that that under the rules, the FIS rules, applicants will be sending to Fish and Game a list of conservation measures to avoid and minimize or mitigate potential harm. And Fish and Game will be responding both about avoiding jeopardy and about avoiding harm. Both those terms are defined. And that the AoT rules specify conservation measures to prevent jeopardy. So how will conservation measures to prevent harm, which is a lower bar, and prevent jeopardy, which is a higher bar, be differentiated? So I thank you for the opportunity to comment, and I will follow up in writing with these comments by the close of the comment period. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kevin, for your comments. The next person who is on our list to speak is Lincoln Daly. So if you would recognize him, please, Tom.
Lincoln, you are unmuted.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. I want to thank the previous people who made comments who can better articulate the comments I'm going to make very much better than I could. But two major areas of open for consideration and inclusion in the revised regulations. And one gentleman spoke to the process of what happens after 30-day period. Milford is, as we all know, is going through its own AoT process, and we were on our third extension for an AoT permit that was submitted back in November of last year. So I think it'd be very, very helpful if there was articulation or expansion of the process between DES and Fish and Game, and setting a defined timeline for completion of their review process, so everybody can receive a consistent due process of their applications. I really have no comments about the changes themselves. I think they're all actually very advantageous and improve the overall process. I think the other area of consideration, and gentlemen spoke about earlier, which I thought was very well put, was the consultation between the applicant and the agencies, and trying to not negotiate, but find a best solution that will work to the best interests of the applicant, but also equally important is preserve the environment and preserve the sensitive endangered species in an area. So I think those are two areas that I'm hoping that for further consideration is putting regulations in place that define the responsibilities and a deadline or timeline for agencies to make a decision, and then also provide an opportunity, should there be measures that conservation measures that are going to be introduced, that it be a negotiation between the applicant and the agencies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daly, for your comments. And so, Tom, we will lower his hand, and then the next person that I see on the list to speak is Jason Stock. So if we could recognize him, please.
Hey, Cole. There are 50 kids signed up for football.
Hey, can you hear me?
For flag football.
Jason, I'm going to unmute you in a second. Jason, are you ready? You're unmuted.
I'm ready. Yeah, I was hearing about a flag football
Oh, goodness.
game getting
Jason,
organized.
Someone forgot to mute me again. I apologize for that.
All right.
There are 50 kids signed up for flag football.
All right. Well, good for them.
Sorry
For the
about
record,
that.
my name's Jason Stock. I'm the executive director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. We represent about 1,300 members who own or manage about 1 million acres of land in the state of New Hampshire. Of course, some of that does include rare, threatened, and endangered species. And we have what we think is a very good relationship with Fish and Game and DES, and Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. I'll be brief and I'll forward written comments, but having reviewed the proposed rules, there were 2 points that really jumped out to our members upon reviewing them. One is although we don't obtain an AoT permit, we do obtain a number of approvals, really. One is a timber harvesting permit by rule by virtue of signing an intent to cut, following BMPs, and provided that the harvest is not for development, and that if there's any wetland permits that need to be obtained, they are. And then the second is a general permit by rule for the transportation of forest products. And so our interest in this proposal is that, is we want to see see in the proposal clarity that, what we're talking about is kind of a standard AoT permit, and that these permits by rule, be it timber harvesting or general permits by rule, aren't pulled into this process. We don't think that's appropriate for a number of reasons. One is, forest management and even the transportation of forest products are ephemeral activities. They're short-term. Generally, forest management is done in most instances in conjunction with wildlife habitat management. And so there's, and done in a way to benefit wildlife species, including threatened and endangered species. And the last piece is that many landowners have participated in bio blitzes and heritage surveys of their property, very much on a voluntary basis, and with an expectation that, hey, timber harvesting is a traditional use. We're going to continue to use it. Yes, come out. Let's do it. Let's do a survey. It's neat to learn what's out there and give me some, let me know what's going on. But, we don't want to see that altruism turned around and say, all right, well, guess what? Now you can't manage your land as you have in the past for forestry. So again, we would like to see, at the bottom line here is we'd like to see some clarity that what we're talking about in these requirements, the applicability, we'd like to see a brighter line in the rules as to where they apply in terms of permits and approvals, and that it's, so that's kind of the gist of my comments. Again, we'd be happy to help and work with the agencies in any way possible to navigate this. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak. And if there's any slots left on that flag football team, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Based on my list, Tom, I see no other individuals who haven't had an opportunity to speak once. I see one just adding now, Cynthia Balsius, and she hasn't had an opportunity to speak yet. So if we would please recognize her to speak.
Cynthia, you are unmuted.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks for the chance to speak, and thanks for the continued work on these two pieces of rules. My name is Cindy Balsius. I'm representing the New Hampshire Association of Natural Resource Scientists. And we have a few comments related to FIS 1000. The first one is related to 1002.01, defining action area. And our real concern is, can this be better defined, as it seems like this can include areas well out of an applicant's control. And we wanted to know the parameters with how this was going to be enacted. That in conjunction with 1003.03 B3. So we would like to see that more clearly defined. Then going to 1002.08, jeopardize the continued existence of. As you know, Senate Bill 129 is in, it should be in the House very shortly. But the way it's worded on Senate Bill 129, it says appreciably jeopardize the continued existence of, and it says that through rules that will be defined. When our group reads 1002.08, it seems like appreciably is within the definition of jeopardize the continued existence of, but it's not clearly defined how appreciably or quantitatively what that means exactly. To move forward to 1003.03, we were happy to see that the initial review was going to have a 30-day response. Like other people that have weighed in on this, it would be good to see some other time response times with regard to when additional information is requested and then passed in. It would be nice to see another time limit to that so that it's clearly defined in the rule as well. Then one of our comments, and this is referring back to Senate Bill 129 in conjunction with this, because based on 1002.04, when it discusses consultation with other state entities, we're kind of concerned about mitigation. And we know in Senate Bill 129, there's an open-ended paragraph that would enable mitigation to be done with Fish and Game. But we would like to know will it be clearly defined as far as what types of mitigation we're talking about and how this will work with other programs like the Wetlands Bureau in-lieu fee program, where obviously when we do mitigation for wetland impacts, wildlife impacts are included in that. So we really feel that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that section, and I would like to know a lot more about that. That sums up most of our remarks at this point, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Tom, on my list, she was the last individual who had currently raised their hand in order to speak a first time. And if that is the case, I'm going to make one last call for anyone to raise their hand who's not yet had an opportunity to speak, and wait just a moment for that.
I'd also like to remind attendees that I unfortunately cannot lower your hand for you. So unless you do want to speak again, please open up the participants panel and unclick the hand icon. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to tell if you've left your hand up or if you want to make additional comments. I know that Suzanne Fournier just added her hand, but others have remained up.
Okay. It seems as though we've given a reasonable amount of time for anyone to raise their hand to speak a first time. And so therefore, if we could recognize Suzanne Fournier to speak again.
Suzanne, you are unmuted.
Good afternoon, Suzanne Fournier, Coordinator of Brock's Environmental Citizens. Okay, so let's see, the rules. The first thing about them is that they contradict current law. 212A-A says that the agencies must be reasonable and prudent to ensure that actions they take do not jeopardize. They have to ensure. So if you want to go back to relying on the NHB database, which is inadequate, incomplete, DES people have already publicly said that. Everyone knows that NHB database is incomplete. They know it, they say it, a disclaimer on every one of their reports. Then you're not insuring because you don't have the information. Again, if you want to eliminate the study, which on the DES proposed rules you want to do, you want to shoot blind again. You don't want the information that will inform you to be able to ensure that you're not jeopardizing the species. So the current law, and even if SB 129 passed, you have to ensure that you're not doing the harm. So it's illegal. It's against the law. Let's see. There's a point I want to make about minimized, and minimized might, conjure up images of making things very small. Not necessarily so. In the Brockstown land, the minimized harm affected already 24 acres. Silt fence was put up that blocked passage for animals to get to their food sources. the threatened and endangered species had to walk a mile when they used to be able to cross a field, a pit, or whatever. So minimized is not small. But the biggest point I wanted to make, I will go back to that, is the one that you must ensure that you're not doing the jeopardizing, whether it's appreciably, and appreciably, by the way, is supposed to mean it's noticeable and measurable. So, but somebody has to go and look. So if you're going to do appreciable jeopardizing, then somebody has to go look. So therefore, there has to be a study. So again, it goes back to the study. I believe it's totally illegal to, at this point, to try to remove your study, your required assessment that should be done for every AoT application. Because you've already argued before JLCAR, the Joint Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, and also in testimony before the legislature on SB 129. You've already argued that you need more data. And so this is where you get the data. So thank you.
Thank you for your comments and remarks. At this time, I have no one else on my list who appears to have raised their hand. And so I would note for all of our attendees, I give you one more opportunity if you wish to raise your hand and have any particular comments. And I'll wait a moment if you would like to do that. Okay, it appears that there is no one else who wishes to raise their hand and make any particular comments for us. And so that being the case, I would like to close our hearing and let you know where we go from here. Where we go from here, as we noted before, is you have an opportunity to continue to submit written comments to us. The closure date for that is April the 15th, and on your screen is the address for both the Department of Environmental Services and also Fish and Game. This information and this address is also available on each of our websites. And so with that in mind and hoping to receive your comments, I would like to close our hearing. And Tom, you can now cause us to close and move back to where attendees are no longer seen. Thank you very much.